All right, we're about to dive into one of the most chaotic, destructive periods in all of human history, the 14th century. And we're going to explore a really fascinating paradox. How could a century of plague, war, and total collapse not just end an era, but actually build the foundations for the modern, interconnected world that you and I live in today?
So let's just jump right in with the big question that's going to guide us through this whole thing. How is a new world actually born from what looks like a total crisis? See, the 14th century wasn't just an ending, it was a violent, messy, and absolutely world-changing beginning.
To really get this, we've got to talk about globalization. Now, I know it sounds like a modern buzzword, right? But its roots go deep. This idea of societies being linked together by trade, tech, and culture was already shaping the world way back then. And believe it or not, the crises of the 14th century would hit the accelerator on the whole process. Okay, so let's start by looking at what happened right after all the chaos. I want you to think of the 14th century as a giant global reset button. It was a time of such massive upheaval that it basically wiped the old slate completely clean. All across Africa, Europe, and Asia, societies were just reeling. You had the Black Death, you had constant famine, endless wars. All of it just shattered the old ways of doing things. The Mongol Empire, which was once this unstoppable force, completely fractured. European feudalism started to crumble. And those ancient trade routes? Many of them just went silent. But here's the most important part. All of that chaos created this enormous power vacuum. A huge, empty space on the world stage, just waiting for someone, or something, to fill it. And that brings us to our next chapter. You know, they say nature abhors a vacuum. Well, so does geopolitics. Something always rushes in to fill the void. And from the ashes of these old, fallen empires, brand new, more centralized states started to rise up, ready to grab their chance and literally redefine the map of the world. And what's so cool about this is how you can see this massive power shift happening all across the board. Look at China. The Mongol Yuan dynasty gets overthrown, and the powerful Ming dynasty rises up. In Egypt, you have the Mamluks, an incredible story. They were a class of former slave soldiers who established a sultanate that took control of the ridiculously valuable spice trade. And then in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the Ottomans began their unbelievable rise. These weren't just little regional changes. This was like the entire chessboard of the world being reset for a new game. And what's fascinating is that each of these new powers had a totally different game plan. The Ming dynasty in China, for example, they decided to look inward. After being ruled by the Mongols for a century, their main goal was to purify their culture and politics. They fortified the Great Wall and brought back traditional Confucian values, creating this super stable, self-sufficient empire that would dominate East Asia for hundreds of years. The Ottomans, on the other hand, they looked outward. They were all about expansion, driven by military power and new technology. Their huge victory at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389 was a massive turning point. It gave them a permanent foothold in Europe and basically announced to the rest of the world that they were a new superpower with continent-spanning ambitions. And all of that ambition, all of that expansion was pointing toward one single event, one city, the ultimate prize that would serve as the turning point for the entire world. Now, as you can see here, the Ottoman path to power wasn't exactly a straight line. I mean, right after that big victory at Kosovo, they were almost completely shattered by an invasion from another legendary conqueror, Timur. But they rebuilt. By the 1440s, they were stronger than ever. And the new Sultan, Mehmed II, set his sights on the one city that represented the old world order, Constantinople. 1453, that's the year. He did it. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople ended the 1,000-year reign of the Byzantine Empire. For the kingdoms of Western Europe, this wasn't just a military defeat. It felt like the end of the world. But here's the incredible twist in the story. The fall of one empire became the spark for another's golden age. The shockwaves from 1453 would, completely unexpectedly, trigger an intellectual and cultural explosion in Europe. I mean, listen to that. You can just feel the panic and the dread in a statement like this. It really shows you that sense of crisis, the feeling that the Middle Ages were officially over and a much darker chapter was about to begin. But that's not what happened. This right here explains the incredible chain reaction. It's like a domino effect. See, when Constantinople fell, Byzantine scholars, artists, and thinkers fled for their lives, and they went west, especially to the rich city-states in Italy. And they didn't show up empty-handed. They brought with them a treasure trove of knowledge that had been lost to Western Europe for centuries. The original Greek works of Plato, Aristotle, and so many others.
And this sudden flood of ancient knowledge is what ignited the Renaissance, which literally means rebirth. Thinkers like Petrarch, who we now call the father of humanism, pushed for a return to the wisdom of the classical world. It was a whole new mindset, focusing on human potential and achievement, which was a huge shift from the medieval focus on the divine. And this rebirth was absolutely sweeping. Art just exploded with new themes from Greek and Roman myths. But it wasn't just art. In science, this new spirit of questioning everything led people like Copernicus to challenge thousand-year-old beliefs, proposing a sun-centered model of the universe that would completely change how we see our place in the cosmos. But there was one final, critical piece to this puzzle. A disruptive new technology that didn't just support this new world order, it cemented it into place with, well, explosive force. What you've got to understand here is that gunpowder wasn't just a new weapon. It was a full-blown revolution. Before gunpowder, warfare was all about aristocratic knights on horseback and castles with walls that were nearly impossible to break. After gunpowder, giant cannons could smash those walls to pieces in a matter of days, and groups of regular infantry with firearms became the most important force on the battlefield. The age of knights and castles? It was over, just like that. And we're talking about some serious game-changing tech here. You have early firearms like the heavy arquebus that completely changed how infantry fought. And then you have these monster cannons like the Dardanelles gun, which, by the way, was one of the key weapons used to finally conquer Constantinople. This technology made military feats that were once impossible suddenly possible. And the social impact was just as huge. Think about it. Only large, centralized governments could afford to make all these new cannons and guns. So power started to consolidate, laying the foundation for the modern nation-state. The old feudal lords, the aristocracy whose power came from being mounted warriors, their special status basically evaporated. This new technology definitively shifted power to the kind of states that would go on to dominate the modern world. Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with. The story of the 14th and 15th centuries is just this powerful reminder of how crisis, the movement of people and ideas, and new technology can completely redraw the map of the world. Gunpowder was the great disruptor of its age. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's ours?